The World Cafe has given us space to ideate and problem solve to create collaborative opportunities for success and indicators to measure them. Now we will hear from Charles Mcneil, who will share some thoughts for us to consider as we continue working towards a more sustainable future. Our speaker, Charles Mcneil, is a senior policy advisor on forests and climate at the United Nations Development Program, where over the past 2 decades he has been a leader in UNDP's work throughout the developing world on sound environmental management for poverty eradication. Throughout his career, he has devoted special attention to engaging and empowering Indigenous peoples and local communities. On behalf of the UN Secretary General, he led the execution of the Forest Action Area of the 2014 UN Climate Summit by coordinating a global multi-sectoral coalition of developing and developed countries, governors, companies, Indigenous peoples, and civil society organizations, resulting in major announcements for the summit on reducing deforestation and increasing forest restoration, including the New York Declaration on Forests. In 2008, he co-founded the UN RED program with FAO and UNEP, now a more than $250 million program benefiting 60 developing countries. He also created the community-based RED Plus, CBR Plus initiative, a partnership between UN RED and the Jeff Small Grants program to deliver grants to Indigenous peoples and communities to engage in RED Plus readiness activities. He oversaw the development of the UN RED and UNDP's corporate frameworks on safeguards and accountability system. Charles worked with a coalition of like-minded organizations to ensure that perspectives of Indigenous and local communities were introduced into the intergovernmental discourses on SDGs in the run-up to their adoption in September 2015. He founded in 2002 and chairs the board of the Equator Initiative, a multi-partner capacity-building knowledge and advocacy effort to foster successful local solutions for people, nature, and resilient communities, featuring the Equator Prize. Previously, Charles managed UNDP's Global Environment Facility work throughout Africa and was responsible for UNDP JEF's global policy and programming. Prior to joining UNDP in 1992, he worked in the NGO sector on hunger eradication and sustainable development in South Asia and Africa. After receiving his PhD in genetics with a focus on conservation biology at the University of California, Davis, Charles held several academic posts addressing a range of environmental and developmental issues. Please join me in welcoming Charles Mcneil.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to have participated in this conference and to be able to speak here at the closing event. It's encouraging that one of the world's most distinguished forestry schools would broaden its scope to take on the newly minted and widely endorsed SDGs. In UNDP, where I work, we pay a lot of attention to both these topics, forests and the SDGs, but we have not yet systematically thought through the range of linkages as you have. So these deliberations have been extremely useful for me. My job here is to reflect a bit on what we've learned and the way forward. This conference is about exploring the various ways that working with forests can advance achievement of the SDGs and how progress on the SDGs can also forward the sustainable management of forests. As we know, the SDGs are the most thoroughly worked through and only universally adopted framework of goals, targets, and indicators that will let us know where we are in our aspiration for a world that works for everyone and for all living things. They provide a kind of global roadmap for progress towards the world we want, and they help us design and implement projects, and they offer a scorecard for sustainable development, a way to measure and report on progress. They are bold, comprehensive, and as you've noticed, they are numerous. And they capture almost every sector and component of development. We all know that what we focus on and measure is what actually gets achieved. Otherwise, we drift along as an international community with a very unattractive status quo. So it's extremely encouraging to me that the world community could not only get it together to generate these goals after years of deliberations, but also that every government in the world would actually endorse them. So they're really a big deal, and they're going to have a huge influence, just as the MDGs did. They will determine where donor countries, industrialized countries, will allocate their official development assistance. They will help determine what developing countries governments will focus on. Civil society around the world are embracing them and will work to achieve them, and even the private sector is getting on board in a big way. So they will provide the organizing framework for collective action throughout the world, and they offer an opportunity for real progress in the quality of life for all people and many other species as well. So it makes sense that those of us working in areas related to forests would pause here in this conference to think carefully together how our work relates to the SDGs. As the organizers of this conference anticipated, and as we learned through our breakout group discussions yesterday, there are an astonishing number of ways that forests advance, impact, and intersect with the SDGs, explicitly in SDG 15, but also directly with at least 12 other of the 17 SDGs. We've all known how important healthy forests are to social and economic development, but I don't think forests have received the respect and appreciation they deserve from the rest of the world until recently. And I'm extremely encouraged. Over the last few years, I've seen a newfound appreciation for the role of forests in development. For example, recently the recognition that there's no way to solve the climate crisis without protecting and restoring tropical forests led to the advent of REDD and a tremendous wave of new investments in forest-related actions all over the world. Another thing, activism by consumers and NGOs has mobilized major commodity companies to make far-reaching commitments to deforestation-free supply chains for palm oil, and they're moving towards soy, beef, pulp, and paper. A powerful new coalition of what I'd call strange bedfellows, of governments, north and south, CEOs, NGOs, indigenous leaders, governors of states, academics, the UN, the World Bank, and others have come together to work on forests in a new way at the national and global level. And this coalition made forests the most dynamic and visible action area for all the areas under the UN Secretary General's Climate Summit in September 2014, leading to the New York Declaration on Forests, where over 180 countries, companies, indigenous groups, NGOs, and others committed to massive forest restoration goals and to stop deforestation. Forests were featured probably more prominently than almost any other issue in the Paris Agreement last month, and indigenous peoples were recognized throughout the Paris Conference for the enormous contribution they make and have been making for millennia and continue to make to protect forests and mitigate and adapt to climate change. So it's truly amazing to me what's been happening, and now the brand new SDGs provide another opportunity for forests to make a clear contribution to the broader development agenda. So I think it is strategic and wise for us forester types to deliberate in our thinking on how to maximize progress towards the SDGs. Of course, the moment we do this kind of thinking, we immediately see that the SDGs are all interconnected and linked, and that we need to pay attention to these linkages, or else we may do more harm than good. A classic case of interconnected issues came up yesterday in a number of the sessions related to the forests, food, water, energy nexus, and how decisions on any one impact the others. There's a lot more we could say about that. But it's also true that progress to achieve the SDGs is likely to help us manage our forests more sustainably. Progress to eliminate hunger and poverty, improve health and education, make consumption and production more responsible, reduce inequalities, all these will help make the aim of sustainable forest management more feasible, more doable. So there are many good reasons why those of us in the forest community should continue to pay attention to and engage with the SDGs, and I congratulate the organizers of this conference for having the foresight to structure the conference in this way, and I congratulate all of you who had the foresight to participate. So now I would like to offer a few thoughts on, let's see. Let's see. Oh, okay, good, thank you. I'd like to offer a few thoughts on what I heard here about why forests is so important to the SDGs, not an exhaustive treatment, but an illustrative one. And where do we go from here? What are some priority areas that we and others should be focusing on to continue to enhance the contribution that forests can make to the SDGs? But first, I want to say just a few words about UNDP's role with the SDGs and forests. With regard to the SDGs, UNDP supported the development of the SDGs and helped the process of agreement across the 190-plus countries. We also have a role in the implementation. We're providing support to a number of developing countries around the world to accelerate their adoption, the adoption of the SDGs into national planning processes. Now, with regard to UNDP and forest action, our work is happening in over 100 countries. We're working on the issue of REDD, where we support some 64 countries in national implementation of REDD, supporting them with methodologies and tools and best practices. In the area of green commodities, we're working with the private sector and government to green existing supply chains and by helping countries ensure that basic commodities don't contribute to deforestation. The third area is on sustainable forestry. We support 25 countries with legal and regulatory reform and land tenure rights and access. The fourth area, through the GF Small Grants Program, we've supported 7,000 grants to communities for forest protection. And the Equator Initiative is designed to recognize and support Indigenous peoples and local communities in finding sustainable development solutions and communicating widely about them. Now, as we've seen through this conference, it's clear that forests are central to many of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I want to highlight just 6 in particular and reference the points that were made during this conference. First, on the goal of poverty. We all know that forests play a major role in contributing to what is called the GDP of the poor, where the 2.8 billion people who live on less than $2 a day depend disproportionately on nature for every facet of their lives. Forests in particular are essential to contributing to this GDP of the poor. They comprise about 15 to 90% of total income to hundreds of millions of forest-dwelling households. The second is the role that forests play in enhancing food security locally and nationally. Over 300 million people depend directly on tropical forests for their food needs, and mangrove forests, which provide habitats to 3/4 of tropical fisheries, are essential for securing critical nutrition. In addition, forests harbor half of the world's pharmaceuticals, a kind of lifeline for those who lack access to healthcare and pharmaceutical drugs. The third is the role that forests play in securing water in sufficient quantity and of sufficient quality to sustain life. Protected forests supply 1/3 of the world's largest cities with almost all of their drinking water, and as much as 3/4 of all agriculture worldwide depends on water from forested watersheds and wetlands. The fourth is energy. Fuel wood and charcoal remain among the most important sources of energy, particularly for the world's poor. 1 out of every 3 households around the world, about 2.4 billion people, uses forest products to cook their daily meals. With safeguards and clean technology, forest products will likely continue to be a major source of carbon-neutral energy for decades to come. The fifth is jobs and livelihoods. Forests are an engine of economic development and help to generate billions of dollars for local and national economies. Forests generate more than $233 billion in export revenue alone, employ more than 50 million people, and sustain more than 1.6 billion livelihoods. Healthy forests are nearly synonymous with healthy economies. Finally, forests are the most important nature-based strategy we have for avoiding carbon emissions and sequestering carbon. Forests sequester as much carbon as the entire ocean, enough to sequester about 30% of all CO2 emissions. And furthermore, avoiding deforestation could help contribute to about a 15% reduction in greenhouse gases. Of course, forests impact many of the other SDGs, as we discussed yesterday. We talked yesterday about SDG 3, healthy lives, SDG 4, about education, and SDG 5, gender equality, and so on. So clearly, forests have a key role in helping countries achieve the SDGs. Now I'd like to highlight 8 key approaches that are required if we're going to reach these ambitious goals and still advance the forest agenda. The first of these is the need for countries to find new ways to finance forest protection, sustainable management, and restoration. As part of the shift in financing forests, we need to stop thinking about forest actions as costs and start seeing them as efficient and effective investment vehicles in sustainable development. There are already a number of major sources of funding for forests, including for REDD, And the Green Climate Fund is starting to allocate resources, and I would argue that forests need to be on the top of the list of recipients of that large fund. The second key approach is the need to focus on improving policy coordination and coherence across national agencies and to align forest-related strategies. In a recent survey that we in UNDP conducted across 45 countries, 9 out of 10 cited inadequate policy integration as one of the most important barriers to implementation of forest agreements and progress towards the SDGs. Many of yesterday's working groups highlighted this need for policy integration in our own recommendations. The third is the need to emphasize integrated landscape and seascape planning, such as ridge to reef and integrated watershed approaches. It does no good to protect a mangrove forest downstream if siltation and pollution threaten it, and it does little good to protect forest patches in an island of an urban sea. The fourth is the need to prioritize new forest protection and restoration efforts that optimize the delivery of the wide range of SDGs, such as restoring coastal forests in order to minimize damage from storm surges and protecting forests that provide a safety net to local communities for food, water, livelihoods, and medicines. The fifth is to strengthen efforts to recognize and legitimize the rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities to own and manage their forests. Numerous studies have shown that forest protection by local communities is often even more effective than government-managed protected areas and are likely to be far more sustainable in the long run. The sixth is that we need to be smarter about how we integrate climate issues into forest management by more consciously managing for climate adaptation and resilience as well as mitigation, whether by focusing plantation efforts on species that are drought resistant, as in the photo to the left, or designing a protected area system that maximizes climate resilience, as in the photo of Papua New Guinea's effort to the right. The seventh is that we need to scale up, as well as carefully monitor, efforts to transform supply chains to promote deforestation-free commodities beyond palm oil, to prioritize beef, soy, pulp, and paper, helping countries to develop national land use plans that emphasize production and protection, that is, food production and forest protection, through public-private partnerships of local government and business, while fully engaging Indigenous peoples and local communities. This is critical. And finally, the eighth approach is the need to invest further in the powerful new coalitions of forest countries, donor governments, CEOs, Indigenous peoples, and NGOs that are being formed at the national, regional, and global level to find new solutions to challenges of forest and MDGs. With these approaches in mind, we can surely advance towards the future that we all want. In my last comments, I will reflect on some additional points we heard yesterday from the report backs, and I wanted to highlight just a few things that caught my attention in particular, and I'm sure it caught your attention too. With regard to SDG 1 on poverty, as we know, SDGs were endorsed at the national and global levels, but it will be local communities, it'll be in local communities that the battle for the SDGs will be won or lost. I think that's really important for us to understand that these are goals that were developed for national implementation to be monitored globally, but it's really in local communities where they will take root and happen or not. And there is insufficient thinking on how to translate these goals and implement them at the local level. Methodologies need to be created for bottom-up or local-up integrated approaches so the SDGs, so communities can be fully engaged and their power and potential fully unlocked. In the session on SDGs number 3 and 6 on good health and clean water, I would say that the global community needs to focus, in fact, I won't say this, but the group said this, the global community needs to focus on preventing major health epidemics and crises or outbreaks from ever happening. It's not enough to just respond once they do occur. It's too costly, too expensive, too late. We can't only be reactive, is what I heard from that group. And we also heard that the good metrics do not exist, but we need to move towards developing them. This same preventive approach, of course, is needed in dealing with other major problems. You don't want to start working on biodiversity conservation after extinction happens or once forests are lost. So I took note of that recommendation from yesterday as well. In terms of SDG 6 on health and well-being, it was really interesting to hear the recommendation that we may need to actually pay attention to educating our donors. The donors who provide the funds for the various activities around the world may not be aware of the value of an integrated approach. Donors often focus on their own agenda, their own priorities, understandably, and they may not see that their investments may be threatened by ignoring key linked issues. For example, a narrow focus on health may overlook the key role of water and forest management in addressing community health. Another important couple of recommendations came out of SDG 9 and 12 group. We've noticed that European and North American consumers are getting educated and mobilized and are pressuring commodity companies in a big way to become more sustainable. But some, as we heard yesterday, some major Asian and Middle Eastern companies may not yet be under pressure from their consumers to follow suit. So how can we replicate the market-based successes in greening production and consumption in certain markets that are not as sensitive to environmental concerns? We heard yesterday also about how China and India are the biggest importers of illegal timber from Myanmar. So how to impact these markets? We must pay attention to this. And then I also heard and support the idea that let's take on the one commodity, beef, with the greatest negative impacts on forests, climate, and health. Ironically, this commodity is receiving the least attention of any. Isn't it time to remove the double beef subsidies, both for corn and for cattle, so we don't unfairly accelerate this bad practice? And then we need to find ways to actually embed the real costs of the negative environmental, social, and economic impacts of beef production in its actual price. We need to level the playing field to reduce beef consumption worldwide. On SDG 15, land use, the group talked about the need. We need better methodologies and metrics to help us assess the inevitable trade-offs across alternative uses of land. Should we choose food or biofuels under particular circumstances? What are the real consequences of our land use choices? We just don't yet have the tools we need to assess the trade-offs across the forest, food, water, energy nexus, for example. And on SDG 16, about peace, justice, institution, we talked about the access to data information are more important than ever to manage forests, land, and other resources, to raise awareness and put tools in communities' hands. Global Forest Watch, for example, is a transformative initiative, I believe, and a best practice. However, as we learned yesterday, capacity building to be able to use that information is key to bridge the gap between information and action on the ground in combating deforestation and other issues. And finally, I took note of a couple of recurring themes that happened. Oops, what did I do? It's going to scan. It's starting to scan. Perfect timing. My last two slides here are some recurring themes that I heard over the last 2 days are how important it is to know that it is possible to de-link food production and deforestation. The Brazil example has shown that food production can increase while deforestation dramatically decreases. It is possible, and it's essential that we learn to replicate this experience in other countries and other parts of the world. And remember, it's all about governance. Institutions, laws, policies, how decisions are made, and who makes them. Technical solutions are needed, but good governance is essential too. And next, inequality within and between countries is repugnant, it's lethal, as Milagre and James and Stuart and Mireille were telling us the day before yesterday. The extreme concentration of wealth and disparities among people must be addressed if we're going to get to where we need to get to. And importantly, local communities must be at the table. They must be engaged. Most initiatives simply won't work without them. And another point I heard is the importance of shaping China's buying power. That needs to be addressed for the future. And finally, I wanted to, one caveat to all of this that I heard over and over yesterday is that we have to be careful not to generalize too far, because it depends, it's context specific, and no one size fits all. So we have to be careful about all the conclusions we draw. And then I wanted to just suggest, if I could offer a thought that, Yale here is a leader in the world, and I'm wondering if there's a way that your curriculum could be tweaked to address some of the challenges that we've been talking about over the last couple of days, because I think Yale has a huge contribution to make. And finally, we all have a lot to do, but the possibilities are exciting, and let's get to work. So thank you very much.
Thank you again, Charles, for your thoughtful and insightful remarks. Next, we have Chris and Mariana, who will reveal who won the 2016 Innovation Prize as well as the photo contest. Please join me in welcoming them.
So thanks to everybody for sticking it out and coming out on Saturday morning for the last day of the prize, last day of the conference. Before talking about the prize, I want to just take a minute to thank our two conference co-chairs, Ruth and Erica. They both have put an enormous amount of work over the past, I think, past year, planning and preparing the conference. So if you could join me in a round of applause for Ruth and Erica. So we had a pretty tough job this year of judging for the Innovation Prize. We received 40 applications, a lot of which were for pretty amazing projects from all over the world. So it really wasn't easy to hone down that pool of 40 applicants to these two finalists, which shows that they're both really are winners. Just being selected as the two finalists from the initial pools is a pretty big accomplishment. And with that being said, I'd like to announce that for the first time ever in the prize's history, we have a tie. I know you might not believe me, but the vote was dead even at 33-33. We didn't believe it ourselves at first. So if you'll join me in a round of applause for both Layla and Lady. And if you could please come up to receive certificates for the prize for your projects. So we have a first place award for Tayap Eco Orchards and another first place award for Juntos para Proteger Nuestra Cuenca. Congratulations to both of you, and thank you for coming. Thank you. Yeah. So now to the photo prize. I don't believe any of our three winners are actually here today, but we're going to go through anyway. In third place, we have Santiago Cortez. And in second place, Emma Calio. And in first place, he's actually a professional photographer, so it's not that much of a surprise, David McCarthy. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris and Mariana, again for all your hard work with the prize. So this is the thanks time. We'd really especially like to thank our keynotes, Stuart, Milagre, Maria, and James, as well as our closing remarks speaker, Charles, for their time and their insights. To thank you so much for being here with us, we have offset your travel here by donating to the Urban Resources Initiative, which focuses on fostering community-based land stewardship, promoting environmental education, and advances to the practice of urban forestry. We invite the keynote speakers to step over to the side of the auditorium after closing to receive a token of our appreciation. So let's give it up for our keynotes and our closing. This conference has been an event 9 months in the making, and there are many people who have made this event possible. I would like to take the time now to acknowledge them. This is an entirely student-run conference, so again, I would like to thank all those involved who dedicated their time and their efforts to making this conference a success. So we have a planning committee. Our treasurer is Jacob. Our logistics coordinators are Pooja and Michelle. Could you please stand up so we can recognize you? They put in so much work, all the food, all the organization. Our communications director is Latha. Our ISTF Innovation Prize coordinators, Mariana and Chris. Our web and design coordinator, Alyssa, who I don't believe is here. The SDGs workshop coordinator, David. Our social media coordinator, Irene. Is she? There she is. Our photo contest coordinator, Olivia. Our outreach coordinator, Veronica. And our alumni outreach coordinator, Tumila. Additionally, I'd like to thank all the facilitators and rapporteurs who you all had the pleasure of engaging with in your discussions, and all of the volunteers who came out and supported this event. Lastly, this conference could not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors, so I just want to let you know who they are. It is the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, the Dean's Fund, the Center for Latin American Iberian Studies, and the Whitney and Betty Mcneil Center for International and Area Studies at Yale, the Global Institute for Sustainable Forestry, the New York Botanical Garden Coleman Program, the Tropical Resources Institute, the Forest Dialogue, Southeast Asian Studies Program, African Studies, and Center for Business and the Environment at Yale. ISTF's efforts to link the forests and SDGs will continue after the conference with your inputs through a special edition of the Journal of Sustainable Forestry and a policy report. Our conversations here and the subsequent publications will be presented at IUCN's World Conservation Congress, in September, and we encourage you to stay connected through our social networks. Thank you all for being here with us, and we hope these conversations had and the connections made will inspire and empower your future work with forest and sustainable development. Thank you, and that is the conclusion of this conference.